You hear that sound? Yeah, the sound of the sirens. I have to remind myself every time I hear them that it's just a test of our national emergency warning system, although a part of me will always remain skeptical. Growing up, I had an idealistic childhood. We lived in a small fishing town that had been founded in the late 1600s off the coast of Maine, littered with historic architecture, and the sweet scent of the sea mixed with the scent of the bakery every morning to greet the residents. My family was among the slightly better off in the town, so there wasn't much we didn't have, and my parents showered my little sister and I with love every chance they got. Our father would take us down to the coast to collect seashells for our mother, to then use in little crafting projects of all types with the two of us later. My favorite thing to do was to close my eyes and feel the wind bellowing up off the sea, whipping around me, and listening to the rumbling of the waves crashing ashore. Living right on the coast meant it wasn't uncommon that we would be hit with rainfall coming inland from the sea. On occasion, when the storms were particularly extreme, the sound of the sirens would slowly start to blare buildings into a crescendo, only to climb again and again, ensuring that along with bellowing thunder and crashing rain, our ears were ringing with the severity of the sirens. I never liked when these storms happened. My little sister seemed to be excited by them. She would often ignore our mother's orders to stay inside and run out into the backyard to jump in puddles and spin in the rain. Our father often did nothing to discourage this. On occasion he even cheered her on. I think he enjoyed the storms too and the energy they brought. The day those things came ruined everything though. I remember that our mother and father had been home together on vacation from their jobs, and we were spending the time together. That morning Mom had made a huge breakfast spread, and our father came marching down the stairs, shouting, "Where are my two favorite skippers?" My sister and I ran up to him, hugging him, and then we all sat to enjoy the breakfast laid out in front of us. That's when it first happened. We heard that all too familiar winding up of the siren leading to a bellowing tone, signaling that we should take shelter. Looking bewildered, our mother shuffled quickly to the window, commenting on how it was a beautiful day out. Dad was quick to dismiss the siren as a fluke, and we continued to go about our morning as usual, just with the siren now humming in the background. As the day progressed and no news came about the sudden and out-of-place siren, we were growing antsy. Our father finally decided he had had enough and donned his faded blue baseball cap and bounded down the street into town, determined to get to the bottom of things. Hours had passed and he hadn't returned still, and I could almost swear there were more sirens now, all blasting their song in different directions. As the sun began to set behind the horizon, our mother grew impatient, waiting for our father to return, so she told us to stay put and watch some TV until she returned. She set off into the twilight of the evening in the direction of town. About 10 minutes later was when we saw the emergency broadcast come across our TV. The TV stated a simple pre-recorded message to stay indoors and to shelter in place and await further instructions. This caused my stomach to drop and my throat to tighten up. There I was with my younger sister alone in our house, not knowing where our parents were, having every scary thought possible running through our minds. That was when we heard what sounded like screaming coming from down the street towards town. Jumping to attention, my little sister rushed to the front door and bolted out into the porch, with me following close behind to get her to come back in. When I caught up to her, I found her staring out onto the shoreline across the road with a frozen, confused expression on her face. I slowly lifted my gaze from her to where she was staring. That's when I first saw it. A massive creature bounding its way slowly up the shoreline as waves crashed against its thin, jagged legs. This monstrosity was at least 40 feet tall and looked somewhat human in shape, but far too large and jagged. I could barely make out its features in the dwindling sunlight, but I was able to see it was covered in skin that looked the color of rust, and its arms were almost the length of its whole body, almost reaching the ground, where its hands were covered in what looked like wires and jagged metal. The head was what made the least sense to me in that moment. It seemed to be two sirens placed on a slim pole, each just off center of the other. The openings seemed to be filled with sharp teeth covered in some type of rusty liquid, with a long snake-like tongue protruding out of each, as though it was tasting its surroundings. I noticed out of the corner of my eye something moving below the creature between the fence lines separating the beach from the grass field we lived across from. It was a person I was sure of once I saw them stand up and make a run for it toward a boat shack about 50 feet away from them. It wasn't long before the creature seemed to take notice of the person, and it blasted out what seemed like a battle cry and bounded after the person, swooping them up in its sharp claws. The person screamed for dear life as the creature raised it to its heads and began to what looked like shredding them alive, spraying blood and body parts far and wide. I stood watching frozen in fear when I heard another siren bellow. Turning quickly I saw another one of those creatures drifting down the road in our direction. Thinking quickly I grabbed my little sister by the arm and rushed inside, where I then locked all the doors and turned off all the lights. My sister and I quietly headed into the small fruit cellar we had with a blanket and an old camping lantern. My sister found a way to fall asleep through the booming sound of the sirens and the screams coming from above us. I sat in that dingy room made of compacted dirt for hours, with my mind transfixed on what could have happened to our parents. As dawn approached, the sounds of the night before seemed to have completely subsided and were replaced by the morning songs of the birds and the calls of the seagulls. We made our way out of the fruit cellar slowly so as to not make any noise. We pushed open the front door slowly, staying low enough to be under the cover of the railing along our front porch. Lifting my head above the railing, standing completely still and maybe only 30 feet away, I saw the creature from the night before, but this time I saw many of them looming still above the canopy of trees and jetting out front the water along the shoreline and standing completely still between homes down our street. I heard a rattling coming from a few houses over and realized it must have been the neighbor's pit bull. There was a loud crack, and the barking grew stronger and closer as the dog came into view. I could see the creatures start to stir as the dog got closer. Once the dog was roughly 50 feet from the creature in front of us, it jerked suddenly, crouching low before releasing a booming siren, sending my sister and I shuffling back against the house and the dog bounding the opposite direction. The sound the creature made seemed to have woken the others because one by one, we heard the winding of a new siren, joining the choir of beastly calls. The dog managed to shimmy itself into a storm drain, just as the creature reached its long thin arm to grab it. Quickly, once the animal was out of the creature's sight, it returned to a still position, and the sound of its siren faded out, followed by the others. Silence washed over us again, and I whispered to my little sister to head for the door and go back inside. Every few hours we would hear the sirens bellow out their hunting call again, and each time we did, my sister and I would sink and cower deeper and deeper into the cellar. As time went on, the sirens got fewer and further apart until it had been a whole day since we had heard anything. That's when I felt the rumbling of what seemed like semi-trucks coming down our street, and I heard a car horn along with a message on a loudspeaker. A loud male voice boomed with authority. "This is the United States National Guard." My sister and I looked to each other, perplexed. "This area is clear, and all surviving citizens are required to report to the command post at the center of town." A look of relief washed over my sister as we hugged. We clambered out into the porch to see with our own eyes, and sure enough there was a procession of tanks and big trucks and soldiers marching down the street with horns repeating the message we heard just moments ago. We made our way into the town center with the procession, as well as a few people who had stumbled out of their hiding places themselves. Once in the town center we had to tell a guard our names, and, when asked if we knew where our parents were, we answered with a no, and told them that they had gone out the first night and never came back. The guard led us to a tent with a few other children we recognized and left us there to wait. Some time later that same guard came in asking for us both to follow him once more, and he led us to what looked like a medical tent. It was in there, on a cot in the corner, we saw our mother who was crying tears of joy wrapping us up in her arms, one of them wrapped up in bandages. Instantly the world stopped, however, as the booming sound of a siren bellowed out through the air. My blood ran cold and my mother grabbed us both, and we ran outside. There, bounding down the street, was another one of those creatures, only moving much faster, and seeming even more aggressive than the ones before. Soldiers ran forward shooting at it seemingly to no avail, only making the beast angrier and more vicious. That's when I noticed stuck to a jagged piece of flesh on the least was a faded blue baseball cap splattered in crimson. Before I could articulate what that meant, a blast came from the sky, sending bits of the creature flying in all directions. The remaining inhabitants of the town I had grown up in were forced to relocate, and we all were sworn to secrecy about what happened in exchange for a good deal of money. The official story released by the US military was that a sudden massive storm battered the town and surrounding area, causing catastrophic damage and causing a nearby nuclear reactor to become unstable. This of course rendered the area too dangerous for humans to live there, resulting in the relocation of the remaining population not taken from us by the storm waters. When you hear the sound of sirens, just listen carefully, and if you hear more than one, stay hidden.